Hi everyone, today we're wrapping up our conversation about public relations practice in different countries. And the last region we're going to consider is Western Europe and the so-called legacy countries. These include Australia, New Zealand, and Canada. And you might wonder why these countries are called legacy countries. The answer is simple. They were all under the British Crown in the past, and consequently, their culture and institutions have been strongly influenced by Western European and particularly by British heritage. So I would consider the United States as one of the legacy countries, but America serves as a baseline for comparisons. And examining public relations in our country is somewhat outside of the scope of this class. But before we proceed any further, let us clarify what we mean by the term Western Europe. In fact, Europe can be divided into five more or less homogeneous regions. Northern Europe, these includes countries that are located around the Baltic Sea and Iceland. And these are mostly Scandinavian countries such as Norway, Sweden, Finland, Denmark, and also Baltic countries such as Lithuania, Estonia, and Latvia. Western Europe is green on the map, and it includes the UK, Ireland, France, Germany, the Netherlands, and Belgium. And then Southern Europe, highlighted in yellow, and includes countries that surround the Mediterranean Sea, such as Spain, Portugal, Italy, Greece, and a bunch of others. The last two regions, the Central and Eastern Europe, highlighted in purple and red respectively, and we discussed them last week. So for convenience, we will be using the term Western Europe to refer to the three remaining regions, Northern, Southern, and basically Western Europe. Of course, this is not to say that all Western countries are homogeneous. We should be very cautious about generalizations, but they do share some similarities among themselves and with the United States. For example, the origins of American public relations can be actually traced back to Europe. You might be surprised, but the American pioneer Edward Bernays was actually a nephew of Sigmund Freud, who was an Austrian neurologist and the founder of psychoanalysis. And the theories developed by Freud had a very strong influence on Bernays' perspectives on persuasion and mass communication. So what is considered public relations in Europe? What are its key features? Why don't we ask European practitioners to answer this question? And this is actually exactly what von Ruller and Verchich did in 2004. They gathered together a bunch of public relations practitioners and academics from Europe and asked them to describe public relations as they saw it. And as a result, they, if you will, distilled four major public relations features in Europe. First of all, they agreed upon public relations being reflective. This characteristic is concerned with organizational standards, values, and views, and aimed at the development of mission and strategies. So it implies that the role of public relations is to analyze trends, changing standards and values in societies, and then discuss it with the organization, with its staff, and adjust, probably if necessary, adjust the standards and values or standpoints of the organization in accordance with these changing standards. For example, in response to the body positivity trend, more and more brands begin to design plus size clothes. On this year's Paris Fashion Week, a bunch of high-end brands banned hiring zero-size models, and all these changes in the society, they must be anticipated by practitioners, and they also They must be the ones who convince their CEOs to take preemptive measures in order to prevent crisis. And in the US, this function is also called horizon scanning and issues management. Second, they describe public relations as being managerial. This is concerned with internal and external audiences, public opinion as a whole, and it involves strategic communication, relationship building, and reputation management. In other words, it's formulating long-term communication objectives. Third, of course, if public relations practitioners set long-term goals and strategies, they will also be responsible for tactics, including developing key messages, selecting appropriate channels, and other technical tasks. And this describes public relations as being operational. Finally, the practitioners and academics in Europe also stress the educational function of public relations. What they meant is that a PR practitioner's job to help their company's management and employees improve their behavioral and communication skills, because you actually never know who can sometimes happen to speak on behalf of your company, especially in the social media world. In my practice, when I was responsible for the online community management of the internet provider I was working for, I was very eager to engage our technical support staff, because we would frequently receive purely technical questions about routers, switches, and things like that. So we agreed that there would be one person in each shift to respond to that kind of questions online. And oh my God, I wish I would not have done this. It turned out that our tech support online behavior were sometimes completely inappropriate. And yes, we ended up training our staff with in online communication with customers. The same study by von Ruller and Vertich revealed some challenges to public relations as a profession in Europe. Unlike practitioners themselves, top managers and CEOs just don't see public relations as a management function aimed at building long-term, mutually beneficial relationships. Instead, they want their practitioners to facilitate one-way communication, such as simply informing publics or even creating ads. In addition, public relations in Europe is seldom widely recognized as a separate academic discipline. Many European universities offer public relations as an elective course at the graduate level, and education is always US-centered. They use textbooks written by American authors. And if you would look at scientific journals, you would notice that they relatively seldom contain articles by European researchers. Although this is partly due to translation problems, another part of the issue is also a lack of good research and a defined research agenda. The study also identified 4 interesting paradoxes in European public relations. A paradox is a contradiction that is difficult to explain. So these include the European paradox. All participants in the study agreed that American models don't always fit to the European context that well, but yet European models have not been developed. And the authors in the study actually noticed that all participants were really eager to discuss their ideas with one another, to collaborate, but interestingly, prior to this research project, they had not ever discussed their practice or their studies with one another. So the authors suggest that the models of public relations have not been developed, not because of weak scholarship, but also because of the lack of kind of collaboration. The next is the practice paradox. Almost all of the participants in the study said that they want to see public relations as a management function that stresses symmetrical communication. But yet what they did in practice is they did what their clients expected them to do. So basically they were facilitating one-way communication and doing the technical tasks. The next is the conceptual paradox. Almost all participants, while they understood one another, the academia and practitioners were actually using different terms for public relations. Like, for example, universities talk about studying communication management, corporate communication, and information studies. National public relations associations have abandoned their name, have abandoned public relations in their names and switched to Association of Communication. And again, absolutely not clear why. And the last one is the theoretical paradox. So everybody in a project stressed the need for research and theory building. But when they were asked what kind of research is currently being done or what kind of research they would like to be done, nobody could actually explain. And even though concepts such as communication, persuasion, and relationship popped up all the time, even academics were not able to explain what these concepts mean. So the researchers actually say that it is not only the practice of public relations lacks sound theoretical basis, but also at the academic level there is no clear definition or even a debate on any of such theoretical basis. Nevertheless, public relations do exist in Europe as a profession, and its development was shaped by three major forces or trends, if you will. First of all, is, if I mentioned earlier, the map of Europe has been shaped and reshaped multiple times throughout the last 100 years. New countries appeared and disappeared, and particularly after the end of the Cold War, specifically Germany was reunited only 40 years ago. And all these processes, they required nation-building efforts and hence public relations. Then from the formation of new alliances and the expansion of the existing ones such as NATO and the European Union, they required public diplomacy efforts on the part of candidate countries as well as on the part of the existing members to make those alliances more attractive to potential members. And finally, privatization and market economies led to a competition for customers, which forces or pushes companies toward utilizing public relations tactics in order to make their products appealing. So what about the environmental or structural characteristics of Western Europe? As for political systems, most countries are representative democracies. There are some constitutional monarchies, but all enjoy free elections and other freedoms in terms of government non-interference into economy, labor freedom, property rights, and press freedom. Corruption levels are fairly low, and they are also quite rich countries, with Germany, France, and Italy being among the top 10 world's largest economies as of 2017. Common currency, open borders, and free trade among European countries all contribute to the increase in cultural assimilation. From the public relations standpoint, this is a good thing because it makes it easier to adopt communication approaches from one country to another. But researchers actually suggest the opposite. Europeans tend to develop the so-called two-layered identities. So their perceptions, self-perceptions, represent a mix of Europeanness with their actual national identity, and public relations have to take into account both of them. Now let's briefly discuss cultural characteristics. The most salient common trait is low power distance, meaning that those with a higher social status will not be treated remarkably differently from those with a lower social status. There are significant regional variations on other cultural indices, especially moving from north to south. For example, countries in the north tend to be more individualistic, whereas those in the south, such as Spain, Greece, or Portugal, they are more collectivist. The north-south differences also exist in regard to the low versus high context communication and monochronic versus polychronic time. Southern nations prefer less direct communication style and are characterized by polychronicity. So if you happen to work with them, don't expect them to come to your meetings or on time, or don't expect them to meet the deadlines. There is no homogeneity in terms of masculinity, uncertainty avoidance, and long-term orientation, so it's better to look at each country separately. Now let's take a closer look at two of them.